Welcome everyone to Unit 2A of our module, What are our priorities? Now all of us relate to the idea of priorities. In fact, probably in our minds we think of a ranked list. Or maybe you think of a to-do list that you use, where you rate things according to whether they're urgent, important, or whether there is no immediate hurry on which to do them. However, less explicit in the idea of priorities is the idea of choices. We have to recognize that we can only achieve one thing at the expense of another. This is because resources are finite. So if we're thinking in terms of time or money or human resource, there is only a limit to how many things that we can achieve from that envelope of time, that envelope of money, or that limited human resource. Now this is equally true if we're deciding which health program we are going to fund. So for example, if we're trying to weigh up a decision between investing in mental health services versus end-of-life care. But in the context of this module, we can think of priorities in terms of which intervention or program are we going to have the time, the effort, the manpower to look at the evidence. And it's interesting in this connection to see that the Cochrane collaboration, an international organisation for producing evidence products or systematic reviews in their case, has a specific agenda setting and priority setting group. Very important to the idea of priorities is the idea of an opportunity cost. Now this is best thought of in terms of, if I do this, then what will I no longer be able to do? So by listening to this video, you may no longer be able to play a game with your friends or family. When we come to thinking about methods of prioritization, there are numerous approaches that have been tried. We could think perhaps of the importance of a particular condition through using statistics such as the burden of illness. So how much is it costing to society to suffer the effects of a particular condition or disease? And one of the strengths of that, of course, is that it's looking at evidence, so hard facts, perhaps costs and number of people affected, rather than values. But at the same time, that is one of the weaknesses. All of our priority lists do have built into them the idea of our values, that we view one thing as being more important than another. And so any straightforward statistical approach has its limitations. Another way of deciding on priorities might be through an expert consensus process. In this case, you might have people who are experienced and knowledgeable about a particular condition, and they decide what should be the intervention or program priorities. Now that's all very well, but what happens when you're trying to decide across particular disease conditions? Perhaps particular disease conditions that are very different from each other and therefore are not comparable. Perhaps one is a minor condition but affects thousands of people, another is a very serious condition but only affects a limited number. And what we might expect is that certain unstated values, such as, for example, people's professional affiliation, may affect what they decide upon. So, for example, a nutritionist or dietitian may well favour those interventions that involve a dietary intervention. Similar to this is the idea of stakeholders. This is where you go beyond professional knowledge and engage with lay person's knowledge. Again, we have the value of bringing in multiple perspectives, but on the other hand, we understand that people will be motivated by personal interest. So perhaps if they've experienced a condition, or they have relatives, friends, family who've had that condition, then they may well rank that as more important than conditions with which they're less familiar. In terms of determining priorities, then there are numerous ways. There's things like voting, either one vote per person, or some form of weighting, where perhaps you increase the weight of a vote by, say, the burden of illness. You can have a threshold approach, which is the idea that anything scoring over a certain level or within a certain number of ranked places may be prioritized. One approach that I particularly like is to think of things as a finite resource. This gets across this idea that we are making difficult choices. So in this sort of scenario, you might assign an individual or an organisation, say 100 votes, and they decide how they're going to distribute those votes. So, for example, they could assign 99 votes to their most important topic and 1 to their second topic, or they could perhaps split 20 votes across 5 different areas. How do we prioritise? Well, we can also prioritise in terms of uncertainties. So, for example, what are the areas that we know least about, and so are we prepared to invest money in exploring those further? So we might commission evidence assessments for topics that we have poor data about. We might prioritise by the idea of a tipping point. A tipping point is that point at which you think you can make a difference. So if there are particular conditions where, say, a new treatment comes out and that's just going to make the difference between successful intervention and not, then you might prioritise your resources or indeed your review of the evidence around that particular area. Another thing that you could do would be prioritise according to the process you're undergoing. In this case, you might pursue topics that are rich in literature because you think that you will get some clear answers from them. And so the amount of available literature, whether there are existing systematic reviews, whether there are existing randomized controlled trials, may well determine your strategy. So in summary then, we've seen that priorities are important as both a process and a way of managing our work. We've seen that priorities attempt to balance evidence, what we might call hard evidence, with softer issues like people's personal values. Now, of course, right now your priority is to get on with working through Unit 2A, What are our priorities? Thank you.